Okay, this is a one-speaker meeting. Please welcome our speaker tonight, Brad.
I'm Brad. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Brad.
Is the microphone in the correct position? Wow. Someone always runs up and moves the microphone, so I usually give them a chance. Welcome to the people that are new. Truly welcome, man. What a nightmare. And I can imagine that if you're anything like me, you came here in a white van. I know I did. I went to a lot of meetings in the beginning in a white van. It had a donor's name painted on the back. Barbara Friedrich was her name. She was the heir to a air conditioning fortune or something, and she gave money to this treatment center that I was in. And happy birthday, the chips and all that stuff. I remember holding up those chips. My sobriety date is June 11th, 1989, so I just had 19 years, I guess, last Wednesday. And how many of us have a commitment in AA, like an actual AA commitment? Wow, so there's stuff going on besides at the Pacific Group. That always makes me feel good that you can stay sober without wearing a bad suit and tie. Because there's a school of thought that thinks that that's not true and that's not possible. And I like to smash that myth and know that, that you don't have to join the Walmart of sobriety in order to be happy, joyous, and free. Wow. And I will do my best to tell the truth tonight because you may not know this, trusting souls that you are, but there are people that stand at these podiums and lie. And I don't know how harmful that really is to the group. I have no opinion on that. But I do know that I grew up lying, and I just could not stop lying from a very young age. I lied about stuff that didn't matter. I lied about things when the truth would have actually served better in the situation, just very retarded. And when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, the first thing you start hearing, you start hearing some revolutionary things right in the beginning, like, honesty, open your mind, try to let your natural skepticism and cynicism take a rest for a minute, be willing to do some things. But honesty is right up there in the beginning. And what I never learned, as a child, they told me, don't tell a lie, George Washington and the cherry tree and all that stuff. But they, and then right after they'd give you that story, the phone would ring, and it's like, hello, is your mother there? It's like, Mom, telephone. Who is it? Annie Ora. Oh, tell her I'm in the bathtub. And you kind of like, so there are some mixed messages, and I never was told why you don't tell a lie. And I never really got it until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I found out that that's why I didn't believe anybody. That's why I didn't trust anybody. That's why I was so skeptical and so cynical. Because all I did was lie, so I thought all you did was lie. And that's the real damage that all that lying does, and if you recall, a couple years ago, a guy wrote a book, a Getting Sober story. He sold about 3 million copies of that Getting Sober story, and then they found out that all the really juicy stuff was a lie. And there was this whole national discourse about lying, and I'm sitting back watching this maelstrom going, finally, we're going to hear why lying is so harmful. And it turned out they just said, as long as you don't lie to Oprah, it's okay. Really. And that never even got addressed. So that's a very kind of over-involved way of saying that this is not my favorite thing to do, but I will do it, and I treat it, as something important, and I do not lie if I can help it. The problem is I wasn't paying all that close attention to all this stuff when it was going on, so I didn't know that it was going to be important. So some of the details get lost in the mix. I lost my car too, and I was very drunk. I was with these people, and we were in Honolulu, and we decided that we were going to go from one thing to another. So I went to my car, and it wasn't there, and I got indignant, like I was a taxpayer or something. I called up the police and said, my car's been stolen. There was this whole drama, and then, somebody heard about it, and they go, stupid, you parked it over there. So we called the police back and said, false alarm, and then got in the car, and I drove, halfway across the island like nothing. They got in the car. It was no big deal. So, that's kind of how I lived my life. And the way it all started for me was in Beverly Hills. It's a terrible story, I know. My father was 63 when I was born, and my mother was 28. And, wow. So we do have some people from the Pacific group here. Is that what you really want? Is that really what turns you on? To be with someone you pay for, who hates you and is full of contempt? It's a lonely thing. It's a lonely thing to be with somebody, less than half your age. I've seen it from inside the mansion, north of Sunset with the whole thing. And, and it was tense. I did not have an unhappy childhood by any stretch of the imagination. I actually had a good time, but there were some drawbacks in that relationship. As you can guess, it was my father that had all the money and my mother had all the, sexual attractiveness. She was not from Thailand, which I guess today that would probably be different. But the way it worked for me is in between all the fun and all the, good stuff that I was allowed to have from living in circumstances like that, I had these very weird fears that seemed to come from nowhere. My father was a smartass like I am. He made this offhand comment to my mom that if she didn't quit doing what she was doing, we're going to end up in the poorhouse. I have a vivid and dark imagination. I don't know if that's an alcoholic trait or it's just me, but I pictured this poorhouse, it was like this gray barracks of steel and concrete and tang, and I'd sit in my beautiful room, with my own television and all this stuff, a pony and all this stuff, and I'd wring my hands over this poorhouse, this van that's going to come pick us up and take us to this poorhouse. And I could picture it. It was lit and, oh, God, it was terrible. And I remember my mother asking me what was wrong. And I said nothing. And I could have said, Dad said we're going to the poorhouse. And she would have told me that we weren't and that there's no such thing. And she would have explained the whole thing, and I probably would have believed her. But I just sat with it. And then the other thing that was wrong with me was I did very well in school. I was always clever. I know what adults want. I know how to give it to them, which is, one of the ways to do well in school. And I'd spend the whole summer agonizing about third grade or fourth grade, saying, well, yeah, second grade was easy, and now, long divisions, I'm going to be kicked out of school. And I'd spend the whole summer agonizing about this in my room, between the poorhouse and, flunking out of school. I'm just a wreck. And I'm just a nervous wreck. Very weird. And again, they'd ask me what was wrong, and I couldn't tell them. And if I told them, they would have, reassured me, in any way that they could. And what ended up happening in my family is that my mother got caught having an affair with some series of guys, and that causes a serious rift in that kind of a relationship because there's an exclusivity clause that goes along with those, when you marry somebody for money. And we moved out of the house. My mom had another child. She had my older sister from a previous business partnership that she had been involved in. And the three of us moved to Encino. I guess it was like 1973, and I'm told that's a terrible thing. It didn't really have much of an effect on me. And then we moved to Honolulu, Hawaii, which is just a very weird place to take like a little Jewish spelling bee champ, whose mom lays out his little outfits on the bed every morning, like color-coordinated madras and stuff. It's just not the place to drop someone like that, into the mix. And, as you can imagine, I was introduced to physical violence, to being the recipient of physical violence very quickly, and very terrified by that, very dismayed by that. I didn't know quite how to process it. I never really got the hang of the whole violence thing. I have friends that when all that stuff starts to go down, they just get really kind of jolly, good cheer and calm about it. And they're just like, they just have it happen. And for me, to this day, I'm just not comfortable with all that stuff. And in Honolulu, especially at that time, you sort of had to be to really get along. And I fell in with a bunch of kids that were, in the little neighborhood that we lived in. And I started vandalizing stuff with them. I started stealing stuff with them. And it wasn't like, what the weirdest thing was, it wasn't like they were doing it and they introduced me to it. It was almost like we just happened all at the same time. We just occurred, these little budding criminals, and started burglarizing houses and doing all the bad stuff, which is far more fun than all the good stuff. And it didn't. And the truth of the matter was, the good stuff didn't matter because my mom's now at the Kahala Hilton bar. So any plaque or trophy I bring home from school is going to be ignored because she's at the Hall of Terrace, with the piano, singing Come Rain or Come Shine, and Melancholy Baby, with a Mai Tai and one of those packs of cigarettes that's that long in front of her, waiting for the next rich guy to come and solve this quandary that she's gotten us all into. So, there was no real impetus to be good anymore. Like, who's going to notice? So I was bad, and I found a lot more personal satisfaction out of being bad, honestly. It was really great. And, it did not take long before we ended up with a case. We'd burglarized this house, the garage of a house, actually, and stole a case of Christian Brothers brandy, brought it back to the fort, cleared away all the detritus of our gone childhood, the Playboy magazine and whatever else, the model cars, and made a path and started drinking this Christian Brothers brandy chased with lemon juice. Yeah, I was not a sophisticated Park Avenue socialite. I was an 11-year-old sixth grader going into sixth grade, so that's, as sophisticated as it got at that time. And, I got rip-roaring drunk. Is that the word? There's a lot of, I was thinking about this, all the terms for drunk, like hammered, wasted, shit-faced. They're all kind of negative sounding now, but I used to just live for all that. Oh, we're going to get wasted, let's go. And I got whatever one of those Vulgate signifiers. I got very drunk and crashed a borrowed bicycle into a hedge and, threw up, passed out, and was very happy to do it again. Didn't see the drawbacks in it at all. I was very excited about the whole thing. And, I started doing drugs right away, not knowing I was coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, where you can, talk about your relationships and your car batteries and all that stuff. But if you talk about taking drugs, suddenly people get upset. And the truth of the matter is my reason for being from that day forward really was to get loaded and have fun. And drugs seemed to really be part of that lifestyle. And I started surfing at that time, maybe a little before then. I got really into that. Got pretty good at that, and I found that mixture of, petty crime, surfing, and getting loaded was just a full plate, like all I needed in my life. I didn't see any need for like ambition or career planning or, professional development or personal ethics or any of that. I just think those three things were kind of the trinity of my life, and that's what I chased. And as you can imagine, some guy sat down at the bar one day, like flies always sit down next to spider webs, and he heard that rendition of Melancholy Baby, and he was hooked, So pretty soon we're living in a big house again, I got a bunch of surfboards and a car. You can drive at 15 in Honolulu at that time, so I got a car and a motorcycle, and I'm just running around just having the best time. I'm just going, if it gets any better than this, I won't be able to stand it. Losing cars, that was later, and, crashed the motorcycle and crashed a couple of cars. And, and I had this whole thing that I would do where I would steal stuff from my parents and make it look like it was one of the domestic servants that had done it. Like this mastermind thing, like I'd steal all this stuff from the part of the house where they were, and then when it got discovered, I go, well, obviously it was the butler did it, and they would get fired, and this went on till I was probably 20. And I sat down with my sponsor when we get to the 9th step, because, all this stuff sounds like fun and everything until you sit down and you have to really look at it and go, there is a lot of damage. There are a lot of Al-Anons out there, that kept me alive, and now I have to pay all of this back that I can. And, he came to the conclusion, maybe I have a sick sponsor, but he said, my parents were part of this. It was like this weird passion play that we were acting out, and that tracking down the 70-odd employees that had been fired over my theft was just not something that was going to be necessary. And I'm sure one of you is going to come up to me afterwards and give me a lecture about that, and I'm open to it. So anyway, I graduated high school, which I consider to be the height of my ambition at the time. I was able to accomplish that, and I went off into the world, went to college where I did, very poorly, treated it kind of like my first apartment, and pretty soon I just ended up like bumming around. I'd stay with my parents as long as they could put up with me, and I'd stay with my sister as long as she'd put up with me, and then I'd stay here and stay there, and not really going anywhere, but having a great time doing it. And I was out surfing one day. By this time, I guess I was 23. I was out surfing one day, nothing really special going on, and I got speared in the leg by my surfboard, which isn't all that dramatic. I mean, I've got scars and knocked out teeth. I mean, I've had everything you can happen to you out surfing happen to me. And for some reason, this was just especially bad. It was like a confluence of bad stuff happened, and ended up being in the hospital for 4 months. Had, I think, 7 surgeries, and just ran the gamut of medical misery. And, as you can imagine from the way I've described myself, I wasn't exactly a mature, balanced person that could handle this kind of a setback, and, be noble about it and very TV movie of the week or anything. I was this just ball of anger and self-pity. I think he called it a spoiled brat, and I was like, fix this and get somebody here to take care of this, and it was a mess. By the time I got out of that hospital, I was just done. I was just done. It was like life was over. There was no more surfing. I was in a wheelchair. They weren't sure. They always tell you you'll never walk again. I don't know why. I think Marcus Welby started that, and just nobody ever wanted to break that cycle. But I mean, everyone I know has been told that. So anyway, they told me that, and I started making the rounds of people's couches, and I started really wearing out my welcome. I started, of course, straight out of the hospital back at my parents' house, and they had somebody taking care of me, and they found me having a seizure in the closet, which, I wasn't really there. I don't know, but they're probably a reliable witness. So they sat me down and had like a, intervention of sorts and said, this all has to stop. You can't be having seizures in our guest house and stuff. And, it was before, luckily I grew up in the days before video cameras. I see this stuff now and I just go, I got away with a lot because of the time I was born, I think. So they kicked me out. I started staying on people's couches, mostly drug dealers' couches and people like that. And I started going into these things. We used to call it a crying drunk, which, I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. We used to talk about it all the time. It's where you get up at 10 o'clock in the morning to watch the Three Stooges, which comes on at noon. So you start drinking, Gilby's vodka at that time was my drink. It comes in a plastic bottle, which is convenient, and it's cheap, and they sell it right at the safe. I'm start drinking Gilby's vodka, getting ready for the Three Stooges to come on, getting primed, and then suddenly I just start to cry because I'm so full of self-pity. I hate my life so bad, and all the stuff that I want to do has now been taken away from me. And, like clear stuff's coming out of my nose, and tears are like projecting out of that's an exaggeration, but, it's washing out my face. I'm just like, and people are sitting around, they're not exactly in touch with their feelings. They're like junkies and alcoholics, and they're just going like, get him out of here. Like, do something with him, And so I'd get kind of pushed out of there, and, at the next place I'd steal something, and I'd be helping the person look for it when they'd find it on my person. And, just really a pathetic mess, just really sad. All the fun of all the wonder of getting loaded and all the fun of it, and all these secrets that seemed to be kind of revealed to me, that was all gone. It was just kind of a death march at that point. It was sort of like, I was thinking of that Civil War painting with those 3 guys, and they're propping each other up. One guy's got the bandage on his head and those primitive crutches. And I always think of that painting from that time. And, I ended up, of course, calling the person I blamed for all of this, my mother, to bail me out of it. And she put me in Cedar Sinai, 7th floor Thalians, or care unit, it was called, care unit. And, they wheeled me across the street to the log cabin one morning, and I just thought, you have got to be kidding me. Like, happy birthday? What is this, Sheriff John? Like, are we going to dig for pennies in the jug, with the little hats? Because they used to have a show that had that. And, I just was not getting it. I'm in my little wheelchair going, Our Father who art in heaven, just going, you got to be kidding me. So, people with that kind of an attitude don't normally make much of a beginning in Alcoholics Anonymous. I sure didn't. So I ended up, back on the thing, and my parents put me in this apartment, and, I started selling everything in the apartment, doing drugs and drinking and getting loaded, and, I lasted like that for 3 years. I don't know how I did it. I ended up learning how to walk again. I got a job at the Royal Theater over there, making popcorn. I was, I guess, 26 at the time, and, my manager was like 19. I was such a loser, I crushed on the little 15-year-old worker with me or something, the little gal. It's just a pathetic mess, I looked like an X-ray, I was just gray and skinny and just, And, and I just carried on, like people do. I just carried on, until that pink notice showed up on my door. I don't even remember what color it is, but it's pay rent or quit. And I was going to have to choose quit because I wasn't managing my money very well, so pay rent wasn't going to happen. And, and I salute those of you that are willing to, be homeless in order to drink. I wasn't really, it was like the poorhouse to me. Like I just couldn't do homeless, so, again, I called my mom, the cause of all this in the first place, and I said, what am I going to do? And she put me in this place out in the desert called Lost Heads Ranch, it was called at that time. It's out in Desert Hot Springs. They have white vans there. And something happened to me in that place. Something happened to me in that place. It didn't happen right away, but it happened. And I can tell you, they took us to a speaker meeting every Saturday night at Fellowship Hall, which I called Full of Shit Hall or Follow Sheep Hall, alternately. And there was a guy there, it was not a young crowd in Palm Desert in 1989. It was an older crowd. I think the median age might have been deceased. And there was a young guy there named Dominic who had a cute girlfriend and a car and a job, things I was sorely lacking, all three of those things. And I would watch this guy, and and everybody knew him. They go, hey, Dominic, and he'd come in the meeting. It was a meeting about maybe bigger than this. And I'd watch this guy, and I'd start to imitate him. Like, that was the best I could do. He'd do something with his sleeve, and I'd do something with my sleeve, and the speaker would say something pithy, and he'd go, ha, ha, and I'd go, ha, ha, watching him out of the corner of my eye, waiting for her to come sit next to me with the car keys or something, literally. And I don't know that I mentioned that I was achingly lonely at this time, like just so lonely. Before I went to this treatment center, I'd gotten this penny saver paper, it's before the internet, and some gal in Australia was looking for a pen pal, and I wrote her a 16-some-odd page letter, and then I waited for her to show up on a white horse or something, and that's pathetic, but that's how lonely I was and how deluded I was. So, so this was a powerful thing to see this, and I didn't, obviously go about it the right way, but they had this speaker come in. I'm outside smoking by where he parks, where the speaker parks, getting a head start on judging him and knowing that it's not making sense. This guy pulls up in a Rolls Royce, which really got my attention, and beautiful woman gets out with him. That got my attention. He's all dressed up. I thought that was kind of silly. And he gets up, and he just blew me away. He just told the most naturally funny, breezy talk I've ever heard, and he was like a natural, it must have been Irish or something, like he'd speed up through parts to really get you going, then he'd pull back because of this grand slam punchline. It didn't seem contrived, didn't look like he gave a shit whether I was impressed by him or not. And I forgot all about Dominic. This roar would come up in the meeting where everybody would just join in this unison of laughter, and I was right there. This guy, I had been a drunken house painter, and so had he, and he talked about how they would, get a bid for a job, and they'd go and they'd put everything in the middle of the house, tape off the whole house, throw tarps over everything, get $500 from the homeowner, and just split for 2 weeks. We used to do that all the time. And I was just like, wow, I couldn't believe it. And, that night, I guess I joined, I was unalone in that crowd for the first time probably ever. I was absolutely joined up for the first time. Surfing isn't exactly a team sport. Stealing certainly isn't, so I was kind of a lone type person, and that I really, really kind of made a start in joining up at that moment. I remember it to this day. And, got back in the van, and of course, You Can't Touch This was the big hit that summer, and we'd hear it, dun, 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 dun. My problems would start all over again on the way back to the treatment center, but I'd been given a little bit of a reprieve, and I guess maybe that's all I needed to make a start was just this reprieve. And, I got out of that treatment center and went to the halfway house, and got a cat, and my roommate and my cat, and we're going to meetings. I got a job working for this satanic drywall guy, and God, he was terrible. And went from that job, to a car wash job. I worked at the Palm Springs hand wash, washing the cars in a slicker and boots, and went to meetings every night, talked to people, went to Denny's, Starbucks hadn't really taken hold out here, so we'd go to Denny's and sit with these people. These amazing people would sit with us. They were just great. And, I have a real good mind for memorization. So I'd go to the library and get these books, philosophy books and all this crap, and I'd start going home reading this stuff and trying to be very deep, and then I go to the meetings, and of course I want to impress somebody, so I start, philosophizing and parroting this stuff that I read, and I know everybody loves that, right? This guy took me outside who I respected and feared, and wanted to please. This guy named Dick Woodward. He took me outside and he said, "Listen, Sunshine," which was not my nickname. It's still not my nickname. And I still don't really know what this means. He goes, "The world is full of assholes. We're not really looking for another one." And he said, "If you want to do that, it's valid, but we don't do that here. This is not where we do that. We do that down the street at College of the Desert. I recommend that you go get that degree that your parents tried to get for you, how many years ago, and give that to them." So, I started the journey of going to college. I ended up, well, what's so funny about that? I'm a citizen and a resident. And, I didn't do nearly as well as I thought, because I was under the impression that alcoholics were the smartest, most creative, brightest people on the planet. We were the chosen ones. Apparently, that's not the case with me. I'm just I have to really work, to really listen. I did finish, community college. I went away to Baltimore, Maryland, got a college degree there, and then I came back here to Los Angeles. I guess that was in 1996. And I went to a meeting, raised my hand and said, I just moved here. People roll their eyes. Guy came up and gave me his phone number. I called him. He told me to go to this meeting. Figured out I wasn't really cool, so he quit hanging out with me, but he got me to the place where the meetings were. Started going to meetings. I went down to central office, got a commitment answering phones every other Saturday night, which I've been doing since that day. And it's a brilliant commitment, I'll tell you. I mean, especially for someone like me. I'm the worst secretary in the world. Somebody comes up, "I don't like the speaker. He talked about drugs." I invite them to do something anatomically impossible at that point. I don't really think it's their place to tell me, I don't care if you don't like the speaker. So I answer phones, and I've actually demonstrably helped people on the phone. I've had people call me up, rung up so tight that they're just dried out, and I can tell they've burned out their sponsor. Their home group's scattering when they walk in because they're so tired of hearing it. So I listen to them. You know what? I listen to them and I try to break the spell by making them laugh. And there's this one woman called up one time, and she had gone out on a couple dates with this AA guy. He was great. He was opening the door for her, listening to all of her boring talk, very attentive, absolutely great gentleman. Then they had gone to a couple movies, exhausted all that. They'd slept together. Now suddenly, caller ID is probably bad for a lot of AA people. He's not answering his phone. He's not at the home group. He's ducking her. And she's tied up in knots. And you know what? I know that rejection hurts really, really badly. I don't know anyone that enjoys being rejected. It hurts. It just plain hurts. And I listen to this lady, and I know, like I said, she's burned out everyone with this. They're going, "He's an asshole. Get over it." But it's hard to get over it sometimes. So I finally told her, "My name is Fingers, and I'm here with Ice Pick, my partner. And if you want to tell us where this guy is, we're going to go straighten him out right now. I don't like what he's doing." And she started laughing, She was, just knowing that somebody would do that for her was enough. We didn't actually have to go and do that, And I actually helped that person, and it's tenuous to help people. It's kind of hard, unless they need a sandwich and you buy them a sandwich, you never really know. But sometimes I hang up with these people and I know that I've actually helped them through that brutal Saturday night. And apparently Saturday nights can be tough for lots of people, not just alcoholics. And what else can I tell you? Oh, of course, over the years, my relationship with my mother got more and more strained, more and more difficult. I mean, probably you come into Alcoholics Anonymous with a picture of what sobriety is going to look like, right? I mean, I know I sat in those first few meetings and I thought, well, I'm going to be with Dominic's girlfriend, I'm going to have that car, and I'm going to be doing this and that, and I'm going to be really cool. I had this whole picture, none of which ever comes true, but it's a picture. And what I didn't realize is my mother had a picture of what my sobriety was going to look like too, and it did not cleave anywhere near, the way I am inside. It had to do with like golf courses and business dealings and, dockers and loafers and all that stuff that's just foreign to me. So we never could really, even through the amends, I tried all the stuff. I tried like agreeing with everything she said and not telling her any of my plans. I tried whatever, and it just never really, neither my sister or I could ever get it together with her. And finally, I guess 9 years ago now, she got into a thing with my stepdad and freaked out, and she called me up and freaked out on me and told me, I never want to speak to you again. Which, it's kind of painful. Even though I hate her, it's weird. It's weird when, you go to AA and people like you and you're a decent person, you're a taxpayer and a citizen, all this stuff, and, you see these horrible guys that sleep with every newcomer, and they're getting up and they're getting a cake from the mom, and the mom's like beaming. They have no idea what a jerk he is, and I'm going, hey, I'm not that bad. Where's my mom and my cake? And it's just like, it's not there. And finally, I guess a couple years ago, my sister got a call in the middle of the night. My mother was in a drunken argument with her drunken maid, and it was about, guess what, her will, because that's all, once they get to about 70 rich people, they can't say a sentence without the word will or trust in that sentence. It's just part of their being. So they got into some drunken argument about this, and the maid ended up shooting my mother 5 times at close range, which, I can't fault her, really. The only really shocking thing was that it took that long for someone to finally, take her to task for all that stuff. And, it was pretty intense. I went to the hospital with my sister, because I figured that would be the right thing to do. And I didn't show up in full drama. I didn't have 20 scarves on and a cigarette holder, and sunglasses, going, and none of that. I just showed up there and I said, look, that woman in there is my mother, and I have the papers to prove it. If there's anything I can do, if there's anything you can tell me, I'll be sitting right there on that thing looking kind of ashen. And they couldn't tell me anything because victims of violent crime, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And finally, this woman, this poor nurse, just started crying over the frustration of the whole situation, and they sent us home. And my mother finally woke up, and they told her, your kids were here, and she said, if they come back here, have them arrested for trespassing, blah, blah, blah. So, I'm glad that amuses you. So I didn't go back because I didn't want to be arrested. And, and that was a tough day. That's a kind of an emotionally charged experience, but the truth of the matter is I have women in my life today, that are my friends, that I care about, that care about me, that I go to meetings with, that have my best interests at heart, that don't give a shit what I want to do for a living. Whatever I want to do, they're going to support me, and that's kind of, that's as close to a mom as I'm going to get, and one of them gave me a cake on Sunday. So I have to be okay with that, and I have to be happy with that, and I know that when I come and tell this story at meetings, I have people come up to me, and say, God, my mom's not so bad, so it fulfills some kind of a need. And not every family comes together through this thing. Not everyone does. Some are just don't. And that's okay. And you have to walk through this thing and live with it. And there are some very seldom talked about drawbacks to sobriety and Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, you start remembering all this stuff that you don't really want to remember. You don't really want to look at. And I start really seeing myself clearly. I start seeing how locked into this little skull-sized kingdom I can get, and how like everyone's in my way, and God damn it, I just need to go to the store, and why are all these idiots, and I really get to see myself doing that now, and it's not comfortable. And the other thing that's really a drawback is I suck in job interviews now, because it's just not natural for an AA person of my type to brag and talk about how great I am and prevaricate and bullshit and all this stuff that people seem to want, in my experience in the last few weeks in these job interviews. They're like, want to hear this whole raw thing. And I'm like, you know what? I will show up on time, properly dressed, in my right mind, ready to do the task at hand, and I have, references to prove it. And they're like, no, we want a full song and dance. We want like 3 rings with jumping poodles. We want to hear how fucking great you are. And I just don't have it in me. And maybe, maybe that's something I have to learn. Maybe I'm seeing this all wrong, but it's very strange. And I was thinking about it. I just got turned down for this job. I found out today, right before I left to come here, which always, it really hits the confidence button, I'm Brad, alcoholic. I don't know, Paige, whatever, it's tough. It's rejection, My first impulse was like, well, screw you. I didn't want to work there anyway and all that stuff. I'm still really, really immature. It's kind of embarrassing. But I don't know. But, that kind of rejection hurts. And what I know is that you keep showing up. I keep plugging away at it. I know that being new, is just like this. There's nothing. Those of you that are new that think there's something romantic or heroic about being sober a while in Alcoholics Anonymous, you're wrong. My experience is that we are just as clueless and doddering as you are. We just know it. And we have, and there's this thing where people want to go, well, I have this set of tools now. Like, everything's okay. I've got these tools. Like, tools are useless. You know what I mean? Like, I've got a motorcycle out there that's a piece of shit, and I've got all the tools in the world. Till I've got some experience with those tools in my hands, some real knowledge of how to apply what goes where with what, they're just hunks of metal. And it's the same thing with those spiritual tools. I had all the spiritual tools that I have now when I got here. I've just learned how to use them, and the, most of the time what I have to do is not a thing, just stay out of it, do what I'm asked to do, and then just stay back, and somehow, I'm still sober. And I'm trying to stretch this out. I don't know why. No one ever complained that the talk was too short. I guess I'm just, I don't know why. But, this is a great group. I see that you guys are all happy and having a good time. None of you are in suits, which speaks well to you. And none of you are on Sunset. And I've only seen a few text messages go on through this talk. So that's good. That's good because I'm a high school teacher. That's what I do now. And, I'm with all this stuff. And, and I have more trouble from the podium than I do in some of my classrooms with, like, the stuff that goes on. And for me, it's important that I behave in Alcoholics Anonymous because, this thing is so fragile, it's unbelievable. When I look at how it was formed, it's like a lot of very weird stuff, confluence of stuff had to kind of come together in a very sensitive fashion in order for this to happen. And a couple of women had to keep a couple of idiots alive for a very long time before they could do that, which was my experience. I had to be kept alive a long time to find this. And so I know how quickly things can turn around for me. Like, I could go home and there could be a message from another interview going, you're not that bad. We'll take you on as a unpaid intern or something. But as quickly as things can turn around, I've seen people throw beautiful, happy, productive lives away over nothing and die. And so I really respect the power of alcoholism, and I know that Alcoholics Anonymous is very, very fragile. That's why I stay in the middle. Thank you for having me.